in those plexuses that you saw around the heart or around the trachea, all the parasympathetics are preganglionics, parts of the vagus. All the sympathetic parts are postganglionics that have already synapsed somewhere along the paravertebral chain. Okay? And we said the postganglionics are in the thing itself. So realize that these thoracic plexuses that you've seen have a mixture of preganglionics from parasympathetic and postganglionics from sympathetic. Okay, to go back to our slide. So the sympathetic's mainly concerned with energy expenditure. It increases heart rates, dilates the vessels, increases stroke volume, pumps a lot of blood out to your muscles so you can run away. The lungs, doesn't do very much. It makes your hair stand up on end. So when you suddenly see the lion chasing you, your heart beats faster and the hair on the back of your neck stands up. When the lion goes away and you sit down and finish your dinner, the parasympathetics take over. They slow down your heart so you don't need as much coronary vessels taking blood into the heart. The lung sort of slows down. You don't need as much air. And the hair on the back of your neck lies down so you don't look afraid. But you don't look bigger. You don't chase the lion off with those giant little muscles in the back of your neck, hairs that make it think you're bigger than you are. Okay. Visceral. Okay. Realize visceral sensory is dull, 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 dull. Visceral motor, as we've said 1,000 times, is going to cardiac muscle, smooth muscle, and glands. Visceral sensory axons, it was on the last quiz, don't have their own, they don't have much imagination. They follow the sympathetic nervous system back. They figure, okay, if there's sympathetic nervous system here, that's good enough for me. So they follow the sympathetic nerves back to the spinal cord, because they have to get the spinal cord to send sensory information up to the brain. But they always just follow whatever sympathetic fibers are lying nearby. So therefore, they can be found in the sympathetic chain near the sympathetic preganglionics. Okay, there are problems in the abdomen. We'll worry about that next week. Like the somatic motor and somatic sensory systems, visceral sensory is a one neuron system. It has a cell body, but it does not synapse. So the things that you feel when you have, say, stomach cramps, the sensation is picked up here, travels all the way back, and goes straight into the spinal cord. I mean, not straight into the spinal cord, but the point is it doesn't synapse anywhere along the way. Again, because there are blood vessels throughout the body wall, there is visceral sensation, although it doesn't do a whole lot. So as long as there's blood vessels out here, there's some visceral sensory involved there. That's mostly what visceral motor is obviously, like I say, making these hairs stand up. It's making you sweat. You probably don't have a lot of you don't have visceral sensory telling that you're sweating very much. But if the blood vessels in part of your body are constricted or they're low on oxygen, you can feel that to some extent with visceral sensory. So here's a visceral sensory part coming from some part of the body wall out here. It comes back, follows the sympathetics. Here's this going through this paravertebral ganglion, but it doesn't do anything. And then it comes back up. It has its cell body in the dorsal ganglion, just like the somatic sensory, but doesn't synapse. And then it goes up and it synapses in the central nervous system, pretty much in the same place that the somatic sensory is synapsing, and that's why they get confused. Yes?
Why does it have to return to T1 to L2 if it has nothing to do with the preganglion?
Because that's the only way that sympathetics connect to the central nervous system. Sympathetics are coming out of the nervous system, right? But the only place they come out, the only access they have to the central nervous system is T1 through L2. So if visceral sensories want to get back to the central nervous system traveling with sympathetics, they don't have any choice. They've got to go back in at that level, because otherwise there's no way to get to the nervous system. I mean, if they follow the sympathetics back up to, L4, that's really cool, but there's nothing there. Yes?
So before it enters the ventral or dorsal ramus, it could be coming from anywhere greater than T1 or L2 or below it?
Yes.
Okay, so how
They
does
can, as long as they're sympathetic, it follows the postganglionics all the way back, and the postganglionics are going to synapse with the preganglionics. So they say, well, we're not synapsing, but we're going to tag along anyway. And then they end up, since all the preganglionics have to end up between T1 and L2, that's their only way of getting back. Right? Otherwise, they're stuck in some ganglion way out in the middle of nowhere.
Right, so before it entered that ventral ramus, it was in a postganglionic of like a
Yes,
higher or lower
these are sympathetic. These are postganglionics coming up here, sympathetics that they're traveling with, and then the sympathetic postganglionic synapses with the preganglionic. This thing doesn't synapse, but it says, okay, I'll follow him for a while, but then I'll follow his preganglionic friend, because I know he's coming from the spinal cord. Yes?
Why is it poorly localized?
Why?
Why?
It's sort of a dull thing. I mean, the things that you feel. So if you cut your finger, it's a very sharp. You know what you're thinking. The things that visceral sensory is usually sort of some sort of general unease, sort of stiffness, or very dull pains, or sort of a generalized cramp. I mean, if you have a cramp somewhere in your abdomen, you can't say, oh, that's coming from this here. This is here.
Yeah, but why not? Why can't you?
I have no idea.
If it travels the same exact route backwards.
I have no idea. Yes.
Does that mean outside of the region of T1 to L2, inside the dorsal root ganglion, you'll only find somatic sensory?
Oh, we'll start again. What?
So if you find visceral sensory neurons only within T1 to L2, only entering the spinal cord at T1 and L2 levels, does that mean outside of those levels at the dorsal root ganglion you'll only find somatic sensory?
Ooh, tough one. Yes, I believe so. That's by definition. That's the only way the preganglionics can get back. They can't get back anywhere else. Whoa, interesting. Yes.
So, okay, what she said just okay, I don't count. So out of T1 and L2, there's no visceral sensory. Is that what she was saying? Or?
That's what she was saying, because if they have to follow sympathetics all the way back to the spinal cord, that's the only way you can get back to the spinal cord.
Okay.
That seems to be the case. So here's an example, okay, of a sixth intercostal space. Okay, where are we going to start? Okay, so we start down here. The blood vessel's got a problem. Okay, it's going to follow the sympathetics. This is sympathetics going to that blood vessel, so it follows it back to the ventral ramus, follows it back through the gray ramus communicans, goes into the paravertebral ganglion, where the sympathetic is synapsing, but it is not synapsing. It's the green, the white yellow, and then it follows the preganglionics, preganglionic, goes up in the dorsal root, which is where the sensory stuff always travels, and gets up into the dorsal horn, where the somatic sensory is.
There's a synapse there, right?
Yes, well, somewhere in the spinal cord up there, yes. And that's where the problem goes, because that's also there's also a synapse in there of the somatic sensory. So something's synapsing up in T6, and you can't really tell which one it is. You
Is
don't
that the
know.
referred pain?
That's what referred pain's all about. That should be the next, one of the next slide. So visceral sensation from the thorax, again, comes in somehow into this paravertebral ganglion but doesn't do anything. Comes all the way up, has its cell body in the dorsal root ganglion, doesn't synapse there, and synapse up here in this dorsal horn. And this is the same thing, you know. The greens are the sympathetics that are following these paths, and the yellows are the visceral sensory that's following the reverse of the sympathetic. So the viscerals, although the visceral is a single neuron, the other one's is a two neuron, so it has a synapse along there, but the sensation just goes all the way back. And that's what referred pain's all about. Okay, so you've got your somatic sensory coming in there, and you've got your visceral sensory coming in there, and your brain says, okay, something's coming from the dorsal horn of T6. Gee, it must be somatic sensory, but it's not. And that's why, you know, when you've got something wrong with your heart, and your body says, oh, there's something burning on the inside of the arm, which I'm sure is the next slide. Right, so, you know, the visceral sensation from the heart is coming back in through these upper thoracic and various, well, ultimately ending up through these upper thoracics. And it comes in there, and your brain says, well, there's something coming from some of these upper thoracics. Gee, it must be some sort of burning sensation on the side of the chest or the inside of the arm, because that's where T1 somatic sensation comes from. But in fact, it's visceral stuff coming from the inside, but your brain's not smart enough to distinguish one from the other, so it assumes that most of the pain is somatic, even though it's coming from visceral, because the connection to the brain overlaps with the somatic sensory, and things get referred to somatic sensory rather than visceral sensory. Yes?
So, how does the visceral somatic, like something, whatever it's called, on this horn, how does that play in? Is it because the somatic sensory and the visceral sensory cross?
They
or
split up.
synapse?
Okay, so once where were we? Help. Okay, so your sympathetics are coming out here. Your sympathetic, motor, visceral motor, is coming out here, synapsing there, and hitting back down. Okay, your visceral sensory is following that all the way up, and if the sympathetics are going to go through here, it's going to go through there too, but it's not going to do anything there. Once it gets to the spinal nerve, though, it says, wait a minute, I'm not a motor fiber, I'm not going to be caught dead in that ventral root. I'm a sensory fiber, so I'm going to go up here where sensory fibers go. So it follows the sympathetic motor up until it reaches the roots. And at the roots it says, we're parting ways here because us sensories go through the dorsal root, not through the ventral root. Okay, now today's dissection. Anyone still alive? I'm glad you all did the heart yesterday, because we may not get to that. Okay. Today we're doing superior mediastinum and posterior mediastinum and finishing up the inside of the heart. What are the things in the superior mediastinum? Well, remember there was, when we did the anterior mediastinum, we found a bit of thymus gland there, maybe. Okay, there is a superior vena cava here in the middle mediastinum, and it is a big vein that is picking up blood from the brachiocephalic vein coming from the right and left sides of the upper part of the thorax. If you go find your superior vena cava, you can track it back up and you'll see the brachiocephalic veins coming in. Well, into the superior part of the superior vena cava. Good. The arch of the aorta, which comes out of the left ventricle, comes out of the heart, right? And then arches around. As it arches around this upper part, it swings up right there. It gives rise to a right brachiocephalic artery, a left common carotid, and a left subclavian. So they're asymmetrical. The stuff going to the head and the arm on the right-hand side is all glommed together, but on the left, they're separate most of the time. So you got the arch of the aorta up in there. The vagus nerve comes out of the brain, travels down here. It gets to the arch of the aorta, gives off a left recurrent laryngeal, which loops under the arch of the aorta and heads back up to the throat to do the larynx. You've got the phrenic nerve that comes out of the neck, that you saw yesterday, runs across the top of the pericardium down here, but it's got to get from the neck down to the pericardium, traveling through the superior mediastinum. The cardiac plexus of nerves, remember, is lying right up there around those great vessels. The trachea comes from the throat, comes down into the superior mediastinum, and then down into just at the bottom of the superior mediastinum, it splits into right and left bronchi in the back, which you saw coming into the lungs. The esophagus, which we haven't talked about, but it comes out of obviously the mouth gives rise to the throat, and then the esophagus forms in the lower part of the throat, travels down here against the back wall, right in front of the vertebrae, goes through a hole in the diaphragm to end up in the stomach down here. We'll see a lot more esophagus later. Well, we'll see most of the esophagus is here, just a little bit of it poking into the stomach there. Next to the esophagus, lying in front of these vertebral bodies, is a lymph structure known as the thoracic duct. It's a very blobby sort of thing. It's a linear structure. It's usually about the size, it's about half the size of a pencil, about half the diameter of this. Okay, so it's a few millimeters in diameter. It doesn't look like a blood vessel. It usually, sometimes you can actually see it looks like a tube, but most of the time it's just some sort of blobby thing. Your instructors can show you, or if you know where it is, like I say, it's right next to the esophagus. So it is